Hello, YouTube. I had a fan and bladesmith, beginning knife maker, get a hold of me last night and he asked me. He said, "Hey, can you give me some advice on heat treat?" So open a whole can of worms here. I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, why don't you tell me how you're doing yours?" He says, "Well, I'm heating it up and I'm quenching it in hot water." Okay. I said, "My blades are really brittle." They probably are. Depending upon the steel, most likely, if it's a hardenable steel, it probably is going to be, especially if you're getting it up to critical temp. Now, heat treat to me starts ever before we quench that blade. Okay, from the time you heat that blade, if you're forging it, if you heat it up to forge that blade, forging at proper temperatures, not overheating the blade, and making sure not to work that steel too cold. These are very, very important. So I came up with just a basic recipe. So for an unknown steel, some steels you really need to run some normalization, thermal cycling for grain reduction. Some not so much, but this is what I'm going to recommend. For the most part, take your steel, make sure you've worked it if it's forged at an appropriate temperature. Do not overheat it. Put it in your forge, bring it up to critical or near critical. If it has chromium in it, bringing it up to critical is probably going to allow it to air harden some, which is going to be a pain in the butt later. So if we bring it up slightly below critical and then allow it to cool, bring it up less than that. So if we're going for orange, like a medium orange, and then bringing up to a bright red, low orange for the second, and for the third, bringing for an even red. Now, of course, that color is going to vary depending. If you're out in the yard, you shouldn't be doing that in the yard, because what's going to happen is you are going to overheat your steel, because you're going to be watching for colors that the ambient light is not going to allow you to see appropriately. So I recommend, in at least under canopy to be doing that. Afterwards, heat your steel to critical after you've done your stock removal. Do not heat it directly under the flame. If possible, put a piece of pipe in your forge, something where your blade is not in direct contact with that flame, so you're not going to blister it, you're not going to overheat sections of it. Allow that steel to soak. I want to recommend at least 5 or 10 minutes on an unknown steel, and then quench it into preheated oil. I recommend, if you don't have access to a quenching oil, use canola. That's got a flash point of about 700 degrees. So once you pull the blade out, it's also going to give you an indicator of what temperature your blade's at, if it flares or not. If the quench has blown the scale off your blade, a good chance are that you've got a hardened blade. Not all steel hardens as much as a file, so if you're using something like a lawnmower blade or something equivalent to that, it's not going to get as hard as a file. After that, I recommend cleaning the blade off. Set your oven 425 degrees, hour 15, hour and a half on it. Allow it to cool. Run 1 to 2 more cycles. Now, that's just a recommendation on where to start. You're going to get into steels that are multi-quench, like 52-100. You're going to get into steels that will air harden, like 5160, 52-100, anything like that with higher chromium content. And then you're going to get into steels that you're going to have to cryo treat that are not going to harden, like a lot of the stainless, although 440C can be oil quenched from my understanding. So I hope that offers some insight. That's not exactly how I do it, or at least how I do it all the time. But it's definitely not my preferred method, but it's a point to start. So hit like and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in a few. Have a good one.